Hello, once again. Welcome to C9K, the show where we talk all things Kubernetes, containers, cloud-native cybersecurity, following trends, WTFs, and big money. And of course, we always deep dive into some form of technology. My name's Steve Jaguar.
And I'm my co-host, Mike Foster. Today, we got a pretty packed show for you. We're going to be talking about OpenPubKey release, the Torchserve critical CVE, and yours truly is going to be giving a demo on KubeHound. Welcome to C9K. Yes, welcome once again to C9K, the live stream show that is typically on YouTube and Twitch, where you can get all the links, all the descriptions, everything you need to know in the cybersecurity and cloud space. It's all at your fingertips. Yep. Steve, what do we have on the show today? I know it's been 2 weeks since we've last gotten together. What's new in the world?
To say a lot has happened would be an understatement. There's just tons of stuff released. I kind of feel like with the oncoming OWASP Global Summit and KubeCon, there's a lot of open source stuff coming out. There's a lot of interesting competitive information. It's just mayhem. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. And I got punched in the face by a dog. You can see, there it is. Who's a good dog? Bam.
You got you. Yeah, no kidding. I mean, the Terraform open source world got shaken. Now there's OpenPubKey gets released, which is a different approach that SigStore has. So that whole community is going to get shaken up a little bit. Yeah, cool. I think we're going to break it down for you as part of the general news. So let's get into it. Yes. The first article and one that you found. Well, the first one's the CISA NSA top 10. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Those will come up.
Yeah. Michael, thank goodness we finally have a top 10. I know. NSA and CISA reveal the top 10, not application security, cyber security misconfigurations. Obviously, totally different from the OWASP top 10, that long-standing bastion of the industry. We can roll down here. We can see why they released it. If we can get them on the screen at once, because it's just so different. Look, default configurations of software applications is a problem. Improper separation of user administrative privilege. So, okay, privilege issues. All right. Yeah. Network segmentation, poor patch management, bypass of system access controls. I'll grant this looks a little more infosec than AppSec, but there's pretty serious overlap. Unrestricted code execution. Well, that's injection. I mean, there's a very serious map over to the top 10 that previously existed, but I guess NSA and CISA, they didn't have enough to do, so now we have another one. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty accurate top 10. I'll give it to them.
Yeah, no, not wrong.
Nope. But in case you wanted to get started on your top 10 for how you can secure your entire organization, go there.
Boom.
There you go.
All right, all you budding CISOs.
Yeah.
Next up,
we have a couple new projects / applications that you found. The first one is this overlay project. You found this one.
I did. It hasn't got a cool logo. Super disappointed that it doesn't have a logo yet. But a browser extension helping developers evaluate open source packages before picking them, gathering data from Sneak Advisor. Now, it sounds like some of these people might be involved. Platinum sponsor being checkmarks. Interesting, right? Debrick, socket dev, deps.dev, because there's a lot of vulnerable information there. I guess there must be an API for deps.dev to make that happen. What I found particularly personally interesting is that back in my Synopsys days, aka when we had Black Duck had a project, maybe still has one, called Radar. Exact same premise. It plugged in. It was a Chrome extension. If I was just browsing NPM, and I was looking at something that it was like, hey, there's critical vulnerabilities in this version you're looking at right now. It went rip, rip, like, and a little red light showed up in the corner of your browser. And I thought it was pretty cool. And I never understood why they didn't double down on the efforts there, or why somebody else didn't write one and use open source vulnerabilities as the feed, because Black Duck was a commercial product. So you had to have it to enable the radar. And I was like, when I saw this, I got really excited. Not so excited that we have had time to try it out, because you're going to do KubeHound, but I will promise to dig into this and do this as a tool time for sure.
You'll promise, but one of the things I'll raise as to why there was not as much adoption is it requires a lot of access to your browser and everything that it reads on your browser in order to go through and give you warnings, let's say. And so the moment I went to the Chrome Web Store to click on it, I got you can't download or use this in your browser.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, on my work computer, you can't. Yeah, because you don't want a Chrome extension that's like going and looking and all that stuff. And I don't know, it tripped some flag internally with my computer. So
having relatively intimate knowledge of how radar worked, it did the same thing. It scraped everything you were looking at on every page.
Yeah.
So it was a good idea though. All right. Maybe I won't be able to try this either, but I'll give it a shot.
Well, we'll see. Tune in 2 weeks and you'll find out. All right. Next, we have another project. I dove into this one a bit, Chalk. It's open source. I forget who the backers are, but it's a pretty cool concept where every little dependency in part of your application gets a little tag or authorization that you can then check a little later on. So that the concept is, you're marking it with chalk and saying, hey, yes, these are all the parts that are in the application, all the dependencies, and then you're verifying it at runtime and saying, have any of these dependencies or any of these applications changed at all? Pretty interesting approach.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, right? So we released a thing last year and a half called Your. Did I ever do it in the show? I think I did.
Yes. Maybe. Yeah, you did.
And it was just mainly Terraform. I know there's things out there that add metadata into Docker files so that you can see see something running and go, well, where was that Docker file from? But there's been this elusiveness around having a more widespread breadth of metadata across different artifact types and being able to, very much in line with SOLSA compliance, say, I have a running piece of code or binary artifact or container or whatever, find something wrong in runtime and not just know where it came from, know the build it came from. That's super cool. And that's what Your did, but this seems like a times 10 version of it. And definitely it's worth us looking at on the show again if we can cram it into a tool time. It looks fascinating.
Yeah, pretty cool. Auto deploy collection tools such as SBOM generators, built-in SIFT as a default, so you don't have to do anything. They have documentation on how to generate SBOMs across the repo. So it's pretty cool. It goes in, pulls all the dependencies, marks them all to make sure they're all controlled and version controlled at runtime. They're the same ones, and then also can help you generate SBOM. That's
it's
kind
sweet.
Of doing it all.
If it's not a gigantic pain in the butt to get working, I think a lot of people will adopt it. Remains to be seen.
Yeah. All right. Up next, we have OpenSSF and threat models.
Now, caveat right in advance, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I just thought I saw OpenSSF announce it, and I thought, oh, this is cool, because the idea of a threat model of an entire open source supply chain to me sounded like epic, but necessary for someone to break it down. And I thought, all right, OpenSSF is just crammed full of super smart people who obviously spent a long time on this. And I am not at all surprised to see it's freaking gigantic. And there's a diagram here. Good luck looking at the diagram. I even zoomed in on it, and it's blurry. So it's complicated and blurry. I didn't get much out of that. Hopefully I can find the original artifact and look at it. But it goes through threats in terms of categorization, consumption of third party, and then it goes into infrastructure. I'll just stop for a second because I'm rushing through infrastructure. Then it says impersonating developer as a threat model and goes through the breakdown, how to exfiltrate secrets, and goes through as a threat model. So it's giving you all the potential areas of attack across a pretty big perspective on the supply chain. And I think even though it's really long, if you're somebody responsible for that entire code cloud scope, it's worth a look.
Yeah, I think it outlines all of the different threats pretty accurately.
Yeah, it's not a pretty document, but it's a good document.
Yeah, I like the tables too. The way it's broken down by table makes it extremely easy to to kind of take and check off like a piecemeal fashion, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure it could be formatted in something that's a little prettier to look at, but generally,
yeah, it's one of those documents you want to finish first, and then you hand over to marketing and say, "Hey, you like publish this as a white paper and make it look pretty, right?"
Yeah, make it infographic. Come on.
Exactly. All right, last piece of general news: the OpenPubKey project that has popped up on the radar the last couple of weeks.
Ooh, yeah, this was the Linux Foundation, Bastion Zero, and Docker come together to announce the launch of OpenPubKey project. And if you haven't heard what the OpenPubKey project is, there's probably a dandy little summary here, but essentially coinciding with the launch was that OpenPubKey protocol developed as part of Bastion Zero's secure infrastructure access product enables users to securely and accurately bind cryptographic keys to users and workloads using an OpenID Connect identity provider and certificate authority. So if this all sounds like blah, 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 it sounds like SigStore. If that's what you're thinking, it sounds like it's because it is very, very, very much like SigStore. There is a demo out there. I've not watched, so I've heard there's a video you can watch that really brings clarity to it that I'm going to try and dig out and find. I was reliably informed by Andy Martin, who's been on the show, that he was impressed and he thought it looked relatively good in comparison, almost too simple in comparison with SigStore.
Okay.
Which brings us to a little bit of a hot take, if you don't mind popping this back up here, because Dan the Man, founder of ChainGuard, is like, oh, funny timing to see the global CISO JP Morgan acknowledging the success of SigStore on the exact day that OpenPubKey gets announced, because it feels like fragmentation for the sake of fragmentation. He's done a few other posts, I'd say, since this one, commenting on how he doesn't understand how its simplicity will work.
Yeah.
So it's interesting given its competing product. So
there's two threads here. One, that the Linux Foundation is sponsoring this project. The Linux Foundation also helps out with SigStore, and other companies help out with SigStore. And so it does feel like, you know, you have an engineering path. You have to make a big technological decision. You make one that focuses on security and authorization in the sense of SigStore, and you move away from JSON web tokens and a simpler authentication service. And that's your engineering choice. And then, you know, a couple companies adopt it, and then engineering comes along and says, well, if we can create something that's based off the other choice, maybe we can pitch that to companies and be as or more successful. It's going to be interesting. Dan does have a really good breakdown about why they made the specific decisions in SigStore and sort of the trade-offs with the JWT, JSON Web Token approach to authorization, one of them being the time that's necessary. The other one being that the token is signed to the individual user. And so if that's cataloged, then you could go back in time and see exactly like who each person is. Like an external entity can do that. So there's some privacy issues as well. It does break it down, does acknowledge that SigStore is more complicated than this version, but that was why the trade-offs are there. So just encourage people, if you're looking to adopt the project, to go read that breakdown.
Excellent. So from that hot take to our hot take.
Yes, extra spicy this week. Okay, so Steve sent me an article this week talking about how the UK is investigating Amazon and Microsoft's anti-competitive behavior when it came to their cloud computing choices. And basically, the UK has 95% of their cloud workloads in these two major cloud providers. And we had a conversation 2 weeks ago about the grift of analysts. I'm going to say that this is the grift of, let's say, governments. And just in general about taking advantage of USA's resources, or the big tech companies' resources, while also being able to enrich themselves. So what do you do if you're a government where you don't necessarily control the reins of the big tech providers of the US, but you want to be able to cash in on some of their large advances? Well, you have a lot of, let's say, crazy regulatory compliance standards that big cloud services have to meet in order for you to do business. And with those compliance standards, you also get to push the product where you want it to go. Now, there's only so much investment and so many providers that can meet these government standards, the two of them being Microsoft and Amazon, because they have enough money that they'll be like, it makes sense if we want to enter business into the UK that will spend the money to follow the UK standards. Then when they do that and it becomes like 50-50, they control most of the market. Well, then the government hits them with an anti-competitive suit and takes them to court and forces them to pay fines and forces them to do all these things. Maybe they create a government body that regulates Microsoft and Amazon in order to make sure that that money keeps flowing back. And so it's a way to take advantage of big tech, but also keep those government bodies moving and make money off it, because it's, especially if you're a prosecutor or something like that, it's very good headlines to be the person that takes on big tech and knocks them down and goes after anti-competitive things. And so that is my new favorite grift, is people creating, let's say, crony capitalistic markets and then wagging their finger when it happens, instead of, for example, maybe going to a competitor like an Oracle or a Google or an IBM and saying, hey, listen, we're going to work with you over the next couple of years to get you into the market to go and take on these big competitors. They just penalize the big competitors for taking advantage of the system they set up. That's my hot take on the crazy stuff. Yes.
I got to up the spice of my hot takes. Yours are always better than mine. All right.
Well, you sent me that article, so you could take credit for that. I got very pissed when I read that. All right. On to, this one is kind of breaking news for when we're recording this. We're recording this on Monday because I am out all week in Raleigh. But you found this 23andMe user data stolen in targeted attack on Ashkenazi Jews.
Yeah, oddly and uncomfortably appropriate at the moment, but 23andMe. So user data stolen. What's the funny thing about this is that it was stolen by brute forcing passwords, essentially, and looking for already released passwords. It is where's the statement? Where we're made aware that certain 23andMe customer profile accessed through individual 23andMe accounts. We believe that the threat actor may have been in violation of our terms of service. well, no shit. And like, as if they care. What a wild response. And so, and the spokesperson told Wired that leaked information is consistent with the situation in which some user accounts were exposed and then leveraged to scrape data visible because they opt into this DNA relative thing, which allows them to share their DNA details and then create networks of people like you would on Ancestry or something, but via DNA, right? Mm-hmm. So that means this is why you can, if you target, I don't know if they are intentionally targeting the attack on a particular culture or race or religion or whatever, but if those are the accounts you get and they're all connected via a DNA mechanism, well, that's all the other accounts you're going to get too, isn't it? It was also confirmed that there was a whole load of, thousands of Chinese descent individuals have been exposed as well, they found. Mm-hmm. But
and also what's incredible, just credential stuffing too, right? That's it. It's just credential stuffing. That's the correct term. Thank you.
Yeah, but they're in denial like they were called. But they're like, well, they shouldn't have had their passwords. And today alone, I've seen multiple, I think even Dan again, multiple people criticizing 23andMe going, did you not have any requirements for users to have 2FA or no requirement for them to have a password that was more secure, a one-time password emailed to them, some form of way to log into the account that wasn't just name password? No. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of these services are targeted to a wide range of population that use them. So for example, Google Console, if you're using Google Cloud, you're probably in a younger demographic where multi-factor authentication is useful. So I think that there's a little bit of a larger demographic there, and somebody who's signing in who's a little older might just want a password and username. Otherwise, they're not going to use the service. And so they cut down on security in the sake of being useful.
Classic.
That's my theory.
Classic. It's the same thing that applies to DevOps tool adoption. Let's make Kubernetes insecure at the very beginning because we want people to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the same sort of thing, but it's like I think the one-time password thing, most people get that. Even really old people can get it. But either way, when all this DNA stuff started and people are sending their DNA into companies, like that rang alarm bells. Like, I've never done that. I'm not sending a DNA breakdown to somebody who can't handle passwords. So anyway, turns out that worked out.
Yep. All right, on to the next one.
All right.
Cloudflare attacks Cloudflare. Cloudflare hack through Cloudflare. How do you want to phrase this one?
Cloudflare used to bypass Cloudflare. Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because Cloudflare whitelists itself.
Mm-hmm.
So what they've kind of done is, well, that's not the. Let's look at the baddie. They're essentially using Cloudflare. I read this whole thing, and I'm like, an attacker can set up a custom domain with Cloudflare and point the DNS-A record to the victim's IP address. Thus, cool. Cloudflare doesn't block itself, and you can do a denial of service attack. So, and among other things. So it's a way of, routing your own traffic through your attack through Cloudflare, essentially.
Just found like a week ago. Just published a week ago.
What was?
This article. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's
September 28th. Wow.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it kind of makes sense because there was a very similar bit of research that was done recently where somebody used, and I didn't find the article, I heard about it. It was somebody used GitLab to attack GitHub, because GitLab's as a service has a range of IP addresses that are traditionally, if you see it used on a GitHub account, you know it's whitelisted. So then you can create your own GitLab account and start using GitLab as the to run code rather than build shit, and use it to attack, because it's almost always whitelisted. I saw that article and I can't remember where I saw it. It's very similar though, isn't it?
Yeah. Interesting. I wonder what the fix is from Cloudflare's.
Good point. I'm sure they. But the thing is, they said they told Cloudflare via their bug bounty program, and Cloudflare categorized it as informative. Thanks. And so they published it. so they published it. I don't know.
Nice. All right. Well, stay tuned for more updates from that one. We'll see if there's a fix. Until then, we came across a software supply chain vendor landscape that was created, over 20 supply chain security vendors. Take a look.
I want your hot take on this. Have you looked at this?
I did.
Put it on the screen.
I'm kind of curious.
Clint Gibler, was it Gibler or Gibler? Oh, one of the two, who makes TLDR-sec. He's a really switched on guy, works for SemGrep. Yeah, this is it. Like, do you think it's
I mean, obviously we're missing some things, like, Prisma's in the CI/CD pipeline. I think there's some kind of weird choices.
Well, we just released that. So yeah, that for me, that makes sense. In fact, this makes me feel, holy crap, somebody's really watching what we do, because we just released that like a month ago.
What specific product is it?
That's a Cider acquisition.
Okay.
And that checks all your pipeline configurations, your activities, and all this kind of stuff. So it actually adds up. And Cycode is a sensible, and Ox, like, this is the right group. But I was being selfish. I went, all right, where's the other Prismas? And it's like, I went to containers, and I'm like, we're not in containers.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. I'm like, Aqua and Systiger in containers. Right.
Like, how'd you miss that? That was like the first Prisma product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it interesting that, like, Red Hat, for example, is in provenance and signatures, but not in containers. not in the build,
Yeah,
the
but
CI/CD pipeline.
yeah, I'm like, how did they end up there?
Maybe just because of
why.
because of how much we give to SigStore as a project, and just in general, like we use the projects like that for us too, right?
Oh yeah, that's probably it, isn't it? For sure, because you're there with ChainGuard. I
Yeah,
didn't
we do
understand why
have like the
Aqua was
trusted
there.
software supply chain that we release. It's every project that comes out of Red Hat has Red Hat next to it. So we just assume that it's not open source or not useful for other tools, I think. Yeah, that's my selfishness looking at this.
I can see that. Yeah, I was impressed that Upticks way down here, like Liz, Orca, the big players at Deploy. I was like, well, Optics?
Yeah.
Okay. I barely know who they are, and they don't seem to be anywhere else. It's like, ugh. I don't know. This was educational to me because this is, while it's not necessarily wrong, it's not necessarily right. It's definitely somebody's perspective.
Yeah,
and I think,
would you consider GitLab an artifact repository? I'm pretty sure they do more than just code, right?
Yeah, for sure. I thought they would be in package as well.
Yeah. So little things like that where, GitLab's marketing team says they have these features, whether or not somebody else agrees with it is a different beast.
Right. This is a good thing. So if I was in marketing or I was in product management or product marketing, I would look at this and go, why is the perception that we don't do this out there?
Yeah.
And go away and try and fix that.
It's a great point.
All right. Moving on.
We have our last. Oh, we have two more WTFs. One of them is a good Reddit thread I wanted to bring up, but
yeah, you can have that.
One about malicious NPM packages striking again, exfiltrating Kubernetes configurations and SSH keys.
It's NPM is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's either Python or PyPy or NPM that security research go through and find 14 deceptive NPM packages designed and using the similar thing, exfiltrate. I like the fact that exfiltrating Kubernetes configurations and SSH keys. It's pretty cool. We look like innocuous names that look like other names. Again, just typo squatting or creating similar looking. It's too easy for people to do this in a scattergun way and just create any form of package that looks like another package that might be a package that looks like it might solve my problem. This is like, I think this is, for this to be probably the 47th time we've had an article like this on here. It goes back to, we need a solution for this. Like maybe it's not overlay or whatever that plugin was, but we need something that when people go to make these decisions to choose these things, there's like a big red alarm on the developer's desk. It just goes, no, this is a copy of something else. Like there's definitely something breaking that this kind of attack still works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no centralized authority on a lot of these package managers too, right? And there is a little bit of talk, for example, about the vulnerability database, the NVD database, and maybe Europe creating their own, and we're decentralizing things, but at the same time, it creates some more security issues and interoperability between tools. So I do think that the lack of centralization of security sometimes just creates other alternatives. So it's almost like instead of APM or NPM, each company is going to have their own internal database of tools and packages they rely on. They do their scan, and then you're going to see some of these more open source package managers and locations start to dwindle in terms of downloads, because I'm just going to fork it once and then I'm not going to trust you after that, right?
Yeah.
All right. Last WTF. This is a Reddit thread that I found. My cyber insurance company decided to proactively do security scans without telling us. Basically, if you read through it, they pay cyber insurance companies a certain amount if they get hacked. That company scanned, I guess, their cloud setup and found a server that was publicly exposed that had remote desktop RDP open. So they probably did a port scan and saw that. I think it was like 3389 or something like that for a Windows server for RDP. And they're like, oh, this is, they sent them a message because if they find things like this and you get hacked through it, you don't get your payout. And so I just said, this is, so insurance companies being an insurance company, it's crazy. Now security teams have to deal with vulnerabilities, their own CISOs. They also have to answer to the insurance companies that they're paying out to make sure that they're within their legal responsibility to maintain things that they're secure or hardened, at least. I thought it was interesting.
Oh, right.
Yeah, who'd have thought this was coming? You pay an insurance company and they're going to not want to pay out?
Well, what's amazing is that if you were a really diabolical insurance company, you might scan and then keep it to yourself and log it because you know they screwed up and it's open. And then when they go, oh no, we got hacked, you go, yeah, you left the back door open, so we're not paying it.
Yep.
And like they could have told you. We could have told you.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's any responsible disclosure amounts or wording in the papers, because I feel like there should be. If you know a customer has an issue with their car, you should have to inform them.
I think the insurance company did them a favor. It might be real next time and not just a temporary server. So I don't think it's a bad thing. Yeah,
just an interesting dynamic. I'm sure the CISO loves to get that email across his or her desk. Right?
Yeah.
All right, spend some money. API security startup Pint raises $6 million. This is an interesting space. Just came across my desk, and there's a couple other API security startups in the world. Salt being a big one that comes to mind, but I think this use case is targeted towards the developers. So something that's local, where you have an application, maybe it's containerized, so you have a lot of microservices, and you want to set reoccurring tests along with some best practice that Pint ships with, and it basically will go through and link your APIs, your developer APIs, your public-facing APIs, and let you know before you're checking your code in, which I think is extremely useful, especially if it's a simple tool that's lightweight. If it can clean up some things before you're pushing it into Kubernetes, and you have a heavier API security tool that's going through and checking, a couple hours later after you've pushed it into test. I can see the value in this.
Seems cool. Yeah, I like it. I'm actually surprised they only got 6 million. Like, it seems like a good idea.
I always think developer-focused tools get the least amount of funding because it's a great selling point to get into the market by getting developers to use your tools. But then actively getting a big company to buy in requires a lot of, let's say, massaging that message. I think bigger organizations with big security teams don't necessarily like developer tooling off the bat. They like their security tools, and they don't necessarily trust the developer tooling.
It's a good point. I like it. It's almost a hot take, and in fact, it may not be that hot. Maybe obvious.
Yep. All right. Next on the docket. This one was funny because I found this and I was like, Steph Curry has a VC fund called Penny Jar.
Yeah.
Also, what a baller name to call your VC fund, Penny Jar.
Penny Jar, yeah.
Oh, sorry, 50 million from the Penny Jar.
50 million, yeah. Jeez, a lot. That's a few pennies. Jeez. Yeah. It's Upwind. I feel like Upwind's been on the show before, but
yes, this is the second round of funding that they've got. I think they had Series A, which was 20 or 30 million, and then now they just got 50. I think it's 30 million. Now they got 50 million, and they're at 80 total since it was founded last year.
That's fast.
Yes, Upwind is shifting the paradigm of cloud security and redefining CNAP with runtime insights.
Here we go. Yet another CNAP out of the box. 0 to CNAP. Okay, easy. Well, good luck.
Like,
obviously,
CNAP didn't even need to be defined, and now we're redefining it. So
yeah, that's right. It's only just started, but if you're gonna get 50 million from Steph Curry, who knows his cybersecurity, let me tell you, then you wanted to get some redefinition in there.
All right, we have the Torchserve framework and the shell torch flaws in cookie time.
Now, what starts with the letter C?
Indeed. Yes. A huge vulnerability. Shell torch. I love good names. I hope it gets a logo. lighting up open source AI users into Torchserve. You know, PyTorch, Torchserve, it's the artificial intelligence open source framework maintained by Amazon and Facebook. Meta. There it is. Right in front of me, looking for the word Facebook. Deploying deep learning models. Yeah. Successful exploitation of the vulnerabilities could let threat actors access proprietary data in AI models. I like these new super modern vulnerabilities. It has, did you see, or the Oligo? Oh, actually, Oligo was the ones who found it. Dubbed the vulnerabilities CellTorch. We got to give them credit because they were their researchers. Near maximum. I think it's a 9.8.
Yep.
Is that what it was over here? Yeah, 9.8 critical, which is, yeah, that's pretty real.
Using a simple IP scanner, they're able to find tens of thousands IP addresses that are exposed to the attack currently. So just by doing a simple scan, they know who is vulnerable. So pretty big impact.
That's a 9.8. Yeah. So as we say, all the links are always down below if you're looking at this and you want to learn more about this because you think, oh my goodness, I'm using Torchserve. Check it out and follow if there's a, did they say whether there is a fix yet or
yes,
litigation?
I believe so. I believe that they have published fixes, although this is a new and kind of breaking news. So it could be one of those Log4Shell. They published the fix, but then it didn't actually solve everything.
Yeah.
So
or
stay tuned.
it takes people a while to make these changes, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, the breadth of impact is pretty huge. So make sure to check that out. All right, on to tool time. We're going to be taking a look at KubeHound. It's going to be fun.
Does everybody know what time it is? Tool time!
Okay, yes. KubeHound. Steve found this one this week. You sent this to me, right? I believe.
Yep.
And it's a really cool take on Kubernetes attacks, I want to say. It's we're always used to looking at a dashboard and seeing a YAML file and trying to figure out if things are secure or insecure. And this takes a more visual approach by identifying attack paths in Kubernetes clusters. Let me just hop into the general architecture. So I have a Kubernetes cluster locally on my device locally. I have KubeHound. So it's a database and it's sort of a fetch. So you're going to run KubeHound. It's going to go and query the Kubernetes API for all the objects, assets, logs, audit logs, things like that. And it's going to export it into Janus Graph, which you're then going to see showcase the visualizations of everything going on in the cluster, all the relationships between a container and its permission set, the different attack vectors that are able to happen. And so it's pretty technical without getting into too much. I've looking at this for a couple hours, trying to figure out exactly how to set it up. So this is a true beginner's look at this as somebody who has never worked in this UI before. That being said, when you do import a pretty big data set, you get a visualization like this, pretty massive. And so being able to sort through and get rid of the deduplication and things like that become a skill. So again, it's one of those things. It feels like, you're picking up a Prometheus database for the first time, and I'm having to go through and figure out all the query language and, how to use it for my use case. So there is I want to say, significant learning curve to this. It's called Can of Worms. That's funny. But I'll show you this in a second. I just want to get down to the what's under the getting started with KubeHound, which is oddly placed personally. Just when you're writing an article, I feel like the getting started either needs to be at the top or the bottom, and it needs to be very explicit. However, this is better than the GitHub breakdown, so I actually like this. KubeHound's divided basically. You can download it on GitHub or pretty much that's it. There's no brew, there's no nothing like that. You have to go and pick your specific version, untar it, drop it in a directory, run the backend up. This then pulls from Docker, creates the container that runs locally as localhost. If you're on a Mac, you will run into permission issues. So make sure that you use sudo and you have the right shell paths set up so that you can call some authentication. Otherwise, you're going to get some mean errors like I did. And then you run this run command and it will go and query your Kubernetes cluster for everything. And then what's under the hood. So there's a graph. basically it has all of these units, which then are linked together by KubeHound. And so just to clarify, the UI is not KubeHound. The UI is a different application altogether. It's this Janus graphic user interface, which I'll show you. KubeHound is basically the ingestion and database section that the graphic user interface queries from. All right. With that being said, I'll show you kind of what it looks like. So I have, just the normal sock shop GKE cluster up. And when I wanted to install this, I did the KubeHound. Let's see if I do this. I'll show you kind of what's in here. You have KubeHound, KubeHound.bat, KubeHound.sh. If I do the KubeHound.sh, and then I do the backend up, it creates that Docker container. And then when I hit run, it goes and queries using my Kubernetes configuration to go and pull all of that. So it loads the data ingester, batch writing it all into the local database that I have, the local container. It's why you do need sudo permissions in order to do this, because you're writing directly into a Docker container. And that's that. So attack graph generation complete. And so this is what the database looks like, or the graphic user interface looks like, I should say, where you're creating a database connection. So think Grafana, Prometheus, that sort of relationship. And it's pretty simple. Localhost is all you need. Well, I should say it's pretty simple if you know what you're doing. I'm going to test the connection. Should work since we're going live. Just leave it in. There are multiple graphs in your database. Select which graph to use. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. I've done G so far, so let's try KH and see what happens. If not, I can always just re-add it. This all looks good. Let's give it a connection color. I should do blue for C9K, but whatever.
So you didn't name that. It's just called G or KH, and you're like, eh.
Yeah, that's what's been imported from KubeHound. Now, I'm sure that part of the script, you can play around with it and give it specific names, but I didn't do that. So I got into this, and I'm kind of like, wait, I have way more containers. Like, why is it only showing 10? And then I realized if you go to the top, you hit 10,000. It's a lot bigger.
Starfield.
Yeah. I do it as a graph. But obviously, if you do it this big, it's a little unwieldy, let's say.
Yeah.
So let's get rid of it.
Super cool.
Yeah, so these are the connections. So between a container and identity, where a container is assuming an identity. So for example, if I'm in the container, I have access to that identity. So that'd be one path that somebody could use to then exploit the rest, I think is what these are what are called vertexes, I think, as part of this. So KubeHound is basically taking the container and the permission set and then creating a vertex between the two so that you can associate the two with each other in the graph.
Yeah,
If I'm wrong, somebody else just correct me in the comments below, but that's what I got from it. So for example, is pod attach, where you have a node and the pod is attaching. That would be pretty much every container that's attaching to a node. So this is a container, this is a pod container endpoint. So that would be the connection. Although it's a little.
Yeah. There are other views above, like vertex view, edge view. Oh, I see. Stable. Okay.
Show vertex on graph. So then you can see the endpoint into the container, into the pod, into the volume. Right? You can kind of highlight each one. Not sure if I want to get into that. But it is pretty intense. Now I can create a new query. But this is the other thing. Okay, yeah. So depending on what you want to look at, you can change it. Now I'm going to go back to the dashboard because what they said, look for low-hanging fruits. So KH containers count. I found this to be kind of interesting. I could just create a new query. Copy
Oh, I
paste that
see.
in.
Run
it. But then this one doesn't show the dashboard, which I kind of makes sense. So it's like syntax error, can't find these. However, it did populate the number that's there. So the amount of containers that are in the cluster, this was a pretty big host, but this one is, only 65, for example.
Right.
But it is kind of cool because you can create graphs and export specific things that aren't necessarily this big graph. You could create a bunch of different queries to just say, how many containers do I have? What's the total amount of endpoints that are available? And you could just have this running like every day to create a bunch of logs. And I'll give you another example. So there's this KH containers critical paths count. So identify critical attack paths that allow an attacker to gain full privileges on the cluster. So these sort of queries are the things I think that KubeHound has built in. That's why it's KH containers critical paths, right?
Right.
So if I go over here and I run that, it'll give me 980 critical paths. Now, one issue with this is there's multiple containers of the same.
Yeah.
So we can get rid of the deduplication by name. So anytime that there's a pod or a container that has the same name that's in the same critical path, we can get rid of that. And we can see what pops out. 176. There's 176 cases where somebody can have access to a container and use it to gain administrative permissions.
So how do you get actionable information out of that?
That's what I kind of ran into a wall with when looking at this. So, we have this endpoints, cluster IP. Let's see if this pops out a graph, because when I ran this before, it didn't. Right, like there's, KH, so KubeHound works there, gives me the amount of endpoints, but it doesn't show the model from the previous queries. So anything that has GV, which is...
Hold on. So let me, unless I'm missing something, there's two graph databases, G and KH.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you're running the query on KH, and then there you're running the query on G.
Yeah, so I think that there's specific functions where, for example, this GV limit 1000 is saying, like, these are the functions of the UI where they go and query the database just for all the points and they put it together in a graph. Whereas when I'm doing query 2, this is calling for KubeHound specific functions for endpoints, and then filtering by all of this data to tell me how many endpoint exposures and critical paths, like how many ways people can access the critical path in the cluster using an endpoint. It's 204 types. But yeah, I don't know what to do with this information any further to dig down into it, right?
Yeah.
At least I don't, like, just based off of.
So it's either it doesn't do it yet, or it does it and it's not at all easy to figure it out. Yeah.
So I was going down, and then this came up, starting with external endpoints results in a much smaller, more digestible graph. But I'm not getting a graph in this. So what, am I doing something wrong? Because this is the issue, is if I'm in here, I'm getting syntax errors. Can't find KH.
Can't find name endpoint.
Right.
But you chose the KH. This is where I'm not.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that something's up with the dashboard or the integration, or maybe it's Mac not allowing certain things. But I feel like that these outputs, because it's showing it, would also be able to show this, which would be really cool if I'm just missing this and I could say, hey, give me all the endpoints, and it shows the 204 endpoints and all the containers they're associated with, right? Which it seems to be would look like a graph like this, where there's a bunch of endpoints all into 2 containers, and then there's the identity associated with it, and then that identity access a volume. Well, then I could say, holy crap, I have a ton of endpoints associated with a very permissive identity, and that's hooked into a very exploitable volume. This is something I need to adjust, right? Like, just seeing that whole visualization is pretty.
It does look
pretty cool.
If that's what you're supposed to be seeing, it seems cool.
Yeah, and I would almost flip this. So if I would do it. I would just pull the permission set over privileged service account cluster admin. Show me everything that this permission set touches, and then work backwards, right? To limit that on all your container identities, right?
Cool. Yeah, I get it.
Let's try this one. I don't think I've tried this one before, so watch it. It's going to crash the computer. Yeah, see, I just get syntax errors. Your query is missing a terminal step GV. So is that all I need to do? G.V. I swear if this works.
You got less.
Yeah. GV will automatically append to list operator before running your query.
What does that first one look like? The GV.
This is GE.
GE. Oh, GV. So you just put GV dot KH. It's not like that
in front. Yeah, I see what you mean. Instead of around it, like a.
Yeah. No, total disaster. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like it screws up all the. Anyways, this is one of the issues that I originally talked about. Was there is a pretty significant query language learning.
Yeah. There's a learning curve.
Hill. Yeah, big learning curve. So I do think this whole node thing is pretty cool. See all the volumes associated with each node. Like even if you just like got rid of everything, right? You just said node and volume. It's pretty cool too. You can see all the pod creates that are associated, pod execs, right? Yeah. Pretty big. So little things that you could just say, I want to shrink this graph, get rid of certain things and only focus on these. Pretty cool. Like this, just alone, you can see all these volumes associated.
Like observability wise, it's already pretty awesome once you get it up there and running. And if that query stuff, if you can master it, or even just like if the cut and paste ones worked, or maybe it just needs a slightly better README.
Yeah. I think that is fair on the README standpoint, because let me go to the Git repository. Maybe the KubeHound documentation is better. The repository, I think, is mostly for developers. So it's the application, the test kit. You know, it has a lot of the same stuff, talking about kubeconfig, making sure things are running properly. But again, build this, just telling you how to build from source or download and run from GitHub.
And it's gone.
And it's gone. The other one, if I go back, is KubeHound.io. Might be a better resource for walking through it all. User guide. Query. Okay. This is what we need.
There's a kh.v. See that?
Yeah, that might be it.
You just do one of those and try it, yeah.
Okay. .v, right?
Dot.
Is that how it was?
Yeah, put a dot in there though.
kh.v. Yeah.
You missed the dot after the V.
Oh, yeah. After the V?
I think it's after the V. If it's like the way it said limit.
Oh, yeah. After the brackets.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, well. Not that easy then.
But yeah, I think that probably requires something like this, which worked. And I wonder if you could just do 1,000. You still get missing gremlin steps, like missing issues with it.
Well, okay. Well, if you're part of the KubeHound project or you have complete mastery of it, we welcome you to come on the show. And,
Complete mastery. It's pretty cool. It's just filtering through the noise and having maybe some defaults set up. Like you think the average Kubernetes cluster, what you want to go through. I think it's just missing those walkthroughs. That's obviously going to take time. The other thing was having, you have to have Docker set up. You have to download KubeHound. You do have to get the GV graphic user interface set up, which is a pretty significant hurdle for first-time users to get all three working correctly. That installation process is a little tough, but it is flexible. I mean, on the plus side, if you had like a container running just in a VM in the cloud, you could theoretically just run KubeHound, once every couple hours in bulk, pull that information. And there was the ability to do that. So you could go and query in bulk or query all the time. So it's pretty interesting just for pure data collection.
It looks like a lot of work's gone into it for it to just sort of, be announced just before KubeCon, but it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Steve's on the chopping block for the next demo. I think, we'll see. What would you say you're going to do? Was it Chalk or one of the other ones?
I'll pick up one of the two. Yeah, well, for sure. I'm more curious about Chalk, so that'll be my preference.
Yeah, so we'll be back in 2 weeks, and then we'll be going to KubeCon. We'll have sort of a pre-show set up, as well as a post-show, post-wrap-up. So stay tuned for all that. As always, links are in the description. I'm Mike Foster. He's Steve Shiger, and we'll see you in 2 weeks on C9K.